Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage!
Pretty scary intro, huh? I thought this might be fitting. Halloween time, and I just remember these. I did a video once on long boxes, CD long boxes, and which are been extinct now for years. And I kept most of the ones that I had that were stylish and had the album covers like this on them, and they were designed to fill the old 12-inch record racks to replace those. So instead of having these CDs that are just a few inches tall, you had the full 12-inch tall box to thumb through. And this is one of the albums that has a great Halloweenish cover, and with the season, my favorite season, upon us, I thought it might scare you a little bit. I love this album cover. I think I like the album cover better than the album. The funny thing is I was, at the time, this was one of those things that I guess I was kind of in the mood for some more mainstream jazz, even though this is a CTI album. It's not one that's one of those arranged CTI albums with string sections or horn sections or anything like that. It's pretty straightforward jazz thing. I know who Joe Farrell was. I had him as a sideman on a whole bunch of things. And so when I was looking through, I guess, the various jazz stuff, because I bought this in a physical store, it was like, maybe I'll go for a Joe Farrell thing. And of course, this is one of those albums that there's a couple factors. The band is great. Jack DeJohnette is on drums, Stanley Clarke on bass, and Herbie Hancock on piano, and then Joe Farrell on saxophone and flute. So it's just a four-piece. There's not typical at all of CTI's output in the mid-'70s. There's no added arrangements and no overdubs, according to this. It's basically a live thing. It's an okay album. It's not great. I think I chose it because, to be honest, once I kind of focused in on, maybe I'll pick up a Joe Farrell thing. There was a couple of considerations. I guess I didn't want anything with too many horn players. I thought just him on horn would be good enough. And then after that, it was kind of a bit up in the air, so I went for the album cover, which I do that sometimes. Sometimes I focus on an artist that I don't have a lot of albums by, and when I look at the instrumentation, maybe he's got the same instrumentation for a lot of albums. So what do I let make that decision for me, which one I pick up? A lot of times, it doesn't happen a whole lot anymore so much, but it's like, you know what, I dig that album cover. And it's very cool. It's not just the eyeball, but it's the whole design thing. It's very hip. This is one of those handful of albums that I wouldn't mind having as a 12-inch album just for the cover art type of thing. So once again, I'm here with my quote-unquote new setup. I'm using one of my recording microphones to record the audio instead of relying on the webcam microphone, because the webcam is so far up here, so far physically away from me, that I'm not really able to capture necessarily very loud, clear audio. Now, I can't quite get the volume up to the level that I really want it to be on the microphone. I'm going through my old hard drive recording mixer. What is this? Roland V something. It was a hard drive that you can't expand, unfortunately, and you can't take out because it's got all the software in there. VS2480. Very cool machine that I recorded my entire Impressions of a Year album on. And that pretty much filled it up. I got a whole bunch of other partial projects on here and things that I don't want to erase, and that pretty much filled everything to capacity. And in a way, I'm glad that I finally got some other system to record on, because it would mean I would have to erase the masters from my own music, and even the things that I didn't use. There's some excellent demos. There's even a couple pieces that are short, but they're complete. That'll come out at some future date, whatever. So I love this album cover. Did I mention how I love this album cover? So I was talking about my long boxes, my CD long boxes, and when I moved, I had a room full of plastic crates, like the kind that you put albums in, the kind that you buy in any like office supply store. They're just the perfect size to store, 20 or 30 LPs, 12-inch LPs in. And I had a whole bunch of those filled with the CD long boxes. And then for some reason, I just forgot to take them with me. I mean, I was kind of in a hurry when I moved out of my old house. And so a year or more ago, when I did my video on CD long boxes, I said, oh, let me show them. And then I realized, holy crap. And this is 5 years after I moved, or 4 years after I moved. That's when I realized I never took those. So most of them, I want to say 90% of them I didn't take. And I ended up with a handful of about a dozen or so that I did take, and I'm glad that this is one of them, because I really like this album cover. But the ones that I left behind, which were some really good covers, were those initial private music albums that came out in 1985, 1986. Those great album covers, like the first couple, like the first two Patrick O'Hearn albums, and I think the Eddie Jobson album, the Sanford Ponder albums. Who else am I thinking? All those initial albums that came out in that original private music batch, they had incredible covers, and those I all left behind, of course. Still, I'm glad for there's some that I have that I'm glad that I did manage to keep, and I don't know how I grabbed, the 10 or 12 that I did, and not the 90 something others. Anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about. So I'm going to do another reminiscing video here, but it's not going to be 45 minutes. And then maybe next time I'll get back to pulling the vinyl again from my back selection there. And I went and did a video. I think I already did a video on this, but this was one of the videos that didn't come out. Who knows if this one will. This machine is very funky. But it was a couple weeks ago. Every once in a while I do this, and I guess probably you'll do this when you get older too, more than likely. But I left my hometown that I lived in for 53 years just under 6 years ago. And every once in a while, I'm not really nostalgic for it in a way. I was glad to move away. And yet there's certain aspects and places that I am nostalgic for. And lately I've found myself wanting to drive through town again, just to see a couple things. And one of the things is and this is going to sound weird, as much as I didn't like my school days or anything, I really liked the school, the yard that was behind my grade grammar school that I went to. It was the same school that housed all the grades right up until high school. So I was there for 8 or 9 years. There was not a big field in the back behind the school where there was like a baseball diamond. It wasn't that big because there was a chain link fence separating it from the businesses, like the industrial businesses that were right behind it. But these industrial businesses were just a couple. One was a brick building, and the other one was a fairly big white tower, which was a factory that made spaghetti sauce. And because I grew up with this and I was always around it, I guess I never consciously noticed it until years after the fact when I thought about it. Whenever you would go outside, and that was on occasion when you would have gym outside during the warmer weather, or even just when you left school and you were walking to and from the school. There was a smell in the air that it was never so strong that I guess I was conscious of it, but I was somewhat aware of it. It was always there. And it wasn't unpleasant or anything. It was just, I guess when I was a kid, I actually thought it had something to do with like the grass, like the smell from the grass, and the fact that the grass was always had to be freshly cut in the schoolyard. And, occasionally you have some plants and flowers and things like that come up, and there's a scent to them. But it didn't dawn on me until I guess it may have even been like the last year that I was in school, or maybe even after I left and occasionally walking by the school again years later, that the scent that I was smelling in the air for all these years, that was never a conscious thing to me at the time, because it was always there, and I started, it was there from the time I was, I don't know, maybe 6 years old or so. It was actually the scent of garlic in the air. Not overpowering, but it was always there. And why would it be garlic? Well, this was a place that manufactured spaghetti sauce, and I guess probably the most obvious scent, the strongest smell of, I guess, any of the ingredients in spaghetti sauce is garlic, or at least in this particular company. And unfortunately, they closed down, so if you go there now, it won't smell like garlic anymore. Like many companies, they got eaten by a larger corporation, and they shut down. Unfortunately, that old factory, and the building is still there, but they painted over the name. And for some reason, I still get nostalgic to, I would like to go back to the schoolyard. Not even the school itself. I mean, the school structure is right there. And it's nice to see the outside of the school structure. But there's something about just that field, which isn't big, but, that field and the factory right past the chain link fence and stuff like that. I get nostalgic for that. And very few other things really from my youth in my old town. There's a restaurant which wasn't there when I was a kid. That's right on the corner of town. If you step away a few feet, you're actually over into the next town. But they only cropped up in the last dozen years or so. But the reason that I like this particular restaurant, it's more of a bar. It's more of a bar restaurant place, very small. But they bought a recipe that there was a pizzeria that was family owned that was in my town that closed down many years ago. But they were one of the originators of a thin crust pie, and their pie was weird. They didn't cut it in triangles; they cut it in squares, and it was famous for in my town and in the next couple towns over. People would come there and pick up the pizzas. And the family business, they closed up and they sold the property, and they built houses there where this bar restaurant used to be. But somebody bought the recipe for this pizza. And a totally unrelated family in a different location, but still in town, started serving these pizzas. And I brought my friend Glenn there because I used to talk about this pie and how special it was. And it was great that he could experience it, because I'm talking about the 1960s here when this place was opened, and it probably closed in the early 1980s. And I don't know that anybody had this recipe for another, 20 years or so, until this other bar in town opened up that I guess was initially owned by somebody that had grown up in town that remembered the pizza was there, the special unusual pizza. And I guess they went to the original family that owned the bar and made some kind of deal where they bought their recipe. So it's good that still lives, because this pizza pie recipe goes back to at least the 1960s, maybe even earlier, maybe even the 50s. This has nothing to do with music, by the way, and it won't. But so I was, anyway, to get back to the story, I was thinking about my town, and I did a little bit of looking up online, and I just entered the name of my town, which is a very small town, and various things come up, and you click on them, and you look it up. And now it's only about 20 miles away, maybe a little bit more from where I live now. But there's very little reason for me to go back there in general, unless I want to take a nostalgic drive through. Now, I happened to buy my Jeep from a dealer about 2 blocks away from where I lived that just happened to be on the highway. Actually, over in the next town, but it was very close to where I lived. And for quite a few years, I had like a maintenance contract thing with them. And so even after I moved here, to get oil changes and things like that, I would still drive there every 6 months or so to get the oil changed and any kind of necessary work, whatever. So for years, I would still go back there for that, and that would be the only reason why I had to go back into town. But unfortunately, the contract ran out, and they didn't have any kind of special contract at a decent price, so I didn't renew it. So I don't have cause to go back there for my car maintenance anymore, which means this has been the longest stretch that I've gone without going to my old town. So maybe that's why in the last few weeks I got real kind of nostalgic for it or whatever. So I was looking it up online, and a few things came up. And now this may get confusing because this involves a few people, this next story. But now, you have to imagine, growing up in the 1960s, there wasn't a hell of a lot on television. VCRs didn't exist, DVDs didn't exist, the internet didn't exist, streaming video didn't exist, satellite radio didn't exist. There were 6 TV channels, and what was on at that given moment was all you could watch. You couldn't tape it and watch it later or anything like that. So life was pretty damn dull. The radio was the radio, whatever. So pretty much the only media that people owned were books and records. But there wasn't a lot of excitement going on. And I think that there was only a couple things to look forward to every year, which was, I always liked the Halloween season, but I don't think it's so much of an event as a season, and I like the imagery and all that stuff. But the things to get excited about were basically, when you were a kid, your birthday and Christmas. Why? Because you're selfish, and because that's the only time of the year that you get stuff. And so for your birthday, you would get presents. For Christmas, you would get presents. So I always looked forward to those things. And that was pretty much all of the excitement that you got on an annual basis. The only other exception was we had an amusement park that had rides and all that kind of thing that was quite a few towns over. Not real close, but close enough to drive there in 20 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. Called Palisades Amusement Park. And since my parents had no money, we got to go only once a year. And it probably took them all year to save the money up just to bring my sister and me there to go on the rides. And my parents never even went on the rides themselves because I guess they couldn't afford it. So they would just bring us kids there, let us go on the rides and stand and wait for us. And we only did that once a year in the summertime. And like I said, I think it took my parents probably all year to save up to be able to afford to take us there once a year. Or else I'm sure they would have brought us there more than once, certainly in the summertime. But that was the only thing to look forward to. The only thing to get excited about. And there weren't a whole lot of surprises growing up in this little town. But the one thing that was a surprise, that was one of these cherished memories that occurred kind of randomly one day. I think it was in the summertime when I was off school. And it always stuck with me. Was there was this day that I went outside during the day, the afternoon or whatever, and maybe I got on my bicycle, I'm not sure. And from over on the next block, I could hear music coming, and it sounded like live music, not necessarily somebody playing their stereo loudly. It could have been somebody playing their stereo loudly, but it kind of sounded like live music. There's just certain rougher qualities that live music has. And that excited me because I was always a music fan. And got on my bike and I just rode over onto the next block. I could hear where it was coming from. My house was on this side of the block. There were houses on the other side of the block, and then there was the next block over. And the next block over, going down several houses to the right, I could tell was where this music was coming from. As a matter of fact, it was coming from a house right behind people that we knew. It was my parents' best friends and one of my sister's best friends, a girl that she happened to be the same age that was in her class at school, right behind their house. And so I got on my bike and I kind of rode around the block, and I see these guys. Well, I hear them. I'm kind of following the sound. I could tell where it was coming from anyway, even from my house, the general direction. And it was pretty easy to hone in on. And what I saw was inside their garage, which was built into their house. So it wasn't a separate standalone garage. It was rather one of those garages built onto the ground floor, and then there's rooms in the houses above there. So it's kind of set back a little bit. But the garage door was open. And I could see these guys playing music. And to me, that was probably the most exciting thing I'd ever seen in my life as a kid. And I still think it is to this day. And, I was so young then, and I don't even know if I was 10 years old or so. But I think I heard them a couple times after that as well. And I knew where it was coming from. And I must have mentioned it to my sister, who spoke to the girl that she was friends with, because the neighbors across the street, down several houses, they must have heard it before themselves, because their houses were back to back with this house where the guy was playing the music. And so they're like, "Oh yeah, that's Doug," and Doug was Doug and his band. And I had only heard the family name. Since I didn't go to school with anybody from the family, and at that time, and I don't know if it was my town or it was that era, so you never hung out with kids that were younger or older than you. The only people you hung out with is the people that were your exact age and your exact grade class in school. So somebody that was a year or two older, you didn't even know them except by name maybe. And because this guy was at least several years older than me, I had only heard the family name and I had heard his name. Didn't know much else about him. Didn't know he was a musician or anything. So, but because my sister's friend and our neighbors, their houses were back to back to this band that was practicing, and I guess they heard them all the time. And they knew who they were. I don't know how friendly they were. I think they probably spoke to each other a bit as well. And so this guy, Doug, had a band for a number of years, and the only reason I don't want to mention the band's name is because when I went online trying to find some information about the band, I found at least 6 bands with the same name, so it would just be way too confusing. And I don't know, because there's so many bands with the same name, I don't know if they ever got to record or not, even like in a semi-professional situation where there might be some vinyl out there of them or something, because, like I said, there's a half a dozen bands with the name, so I don't know if any of them would be the ones that this guy Doug was in. So maybe I heard this band a couple other times, but to me that was like the single most exciting thing that probably ever happened in my life. This discovery, this thing that you weren't expecting to hear, and being a big music fan, it's like, wow, there's a rock band right in town, and the guy being a couple years older, you tend to idolize him. Now, I only knew him by name. I don't think I would have ever known the guy by sight. I never spoke to him. Don't recall ever seeing him in the small school that we all went to, but all the grades were separated and you never saw anybody else from the other grades. But his band got to be, I guess a few years after that, fairly popular in the area, just in terms of playing like local clubs and bars and stuff like that for a number of years, going into the 1970s and throughout the 70s. Now, by the time I graduated high school in about 1977, I don't recall hearing any more about them. Now, what I found out in hindsight only recently was that this guy Doug had moved away and was living somewhere, I think in New York State. I know in New York. I don't think it was New York City. He had moved to New York State and had some kind of blue-collar job or his own business or something, but he continued to play music. And oddly enough, he continued to play music with a lot of the same guys that he formed that original band with, under that original name, and then also under different names when band members changed or something. But for a lot of years, if not all his years, he kept his hand in playing music, but kind of disappeared. Like most people do, you know, coming from a real small town, especially in this area, most people tend to move away. And I guess you can say that for anybody. Most people, whatever town it is that they grow up in, eventually, at some point in their adult life, they move away. And a lot of times they move away a distance, a very far distance. So I didn't hear about this guy Doug for many years, didn't really kind of expect to anymore after a point, and kind of forgot about him. And by the time I got like into my senior year in high school, I was playing in a rock band myself, etc., etc. And there were local bands and bands of people that I knew, so I kind of forgot about this kind of magical, mythical band that this guy Doug had. But going back a few weeks ago, when I looked up online and I was looking up old things from my town, a mention of this guy Doug came up. And then I remembered my sister telling me that, hey, you know, a couple years ago, my sister's friend who lived across the street, our neighbors, the house where they were back to back with this guy Doug's house, this guy Doug moved back into the area and contacted her friend on Facebook. And they kind of reconnected because they're very close. And if they weren't the same age, they were within a year or two. So my sister's friend, which was our former neighbor, and this guy Doug reconnected on Facebook after not, having probably seen you talk to each other for 40 years maybe. And he mentioned at that point to her friend, that he had moved back into the area after living up in New York State for decades, for many years. And that he got his old band back together, which is incredible because, you're not talking about, you think about it. Think about playing with the same guys or most of the same guys. I think the core band of 4 guys was the same as those guys that he was playing with in, 1969 or 70 or 71 maybe, in that garage. I think those guys, the other guys in the group, stayed in the area for the most part. I believe that when he came back into this area about 4 years ago, that he reconnected with these guys. Maybe he was never out of touch with them, but I guess the other guys didn't move away, because I believe that he was playing with the same 3 or so guys that he originally started with. And he reverted back to the old name of his original band, the one that they used originally, and when they got popular and were playing around local bars or whatever in the early 70s, it would have been. And That's kind of weird. It's like taking a step back into your own past, which is a whole nother video I'm probably going to talk about. And because it's something else that came up as a result of me thinking about my old town. So this guy, Doug, came back. He reformed the band. He got in touch with my sister's friend, who was my old neighbor. And he started with his band playing around locally again. And within driving distance of me, I could still go. He was within playing in bars to a certain extent with his old group, within the local towns by my old town. But it was still all within 20 miles or 15 miles from where I live now. And it's one of those things that I put on my to-do list to go see this band, even though I'm probably not going to be into the music. I don't really listen to rock music anymore. But there's this much more of a nostalgia thing. And for the first time in my life, maybe get to talk to this guy, Doug, which is something I never got to do, ever. And tell him about that day when, I was the little kid on the bike and I drove around and I heard the music and I saw them playing and it was all exciting to me. And the reason I didn't stop was because I thought I would have been happy to plant myself in front of that garage and sit there and watch these guys play for 6 or 8 hours. And I'm sure I wouldn't have gotten bored because that's how much into it I would have been. But honestly, as a little kid, I figured I'm just a little kid. They're going to throw me out of here. So I would just keep riding my bike by every once in a while and just to catch a glimpse. Thinking about it now, I should have just parked my bike there, and if they kicked me away, so be it. But you don't think about those things when you're a kid. And I thought for sure they wouldn't let me stand and watch them play, which is silly. So this guy, Doug, comes back, starts playing around locally. I can remember seeing a couple listings on Facebook of his band playing in some local bars. And my sister had initially told me that he had come back into the area, which is how a couple years ago now, or about maybe 4 years ago, my mind kind of got reminded of all this stuff going on, which I had forgotten about and not thought about for years. And I'm sorry, this is going to be a long video again. And so one of the things when I was online kind of researching my old town was I came across a mention of this guy Doug in a newspaper. And it was an article from about 2 years ago now, about 2 years old. And it was Doug's obituary. I couldn't believe it. Apparently he had passed away of cancer 2 years ago, which I never heard of. I don't think my sister ever mentioned it to me. She would have known it because her friend got to be very close friends again with Doug, our old neighbor. She even went to go see him play with his old band on occasion. And once I found that out, I read the rather long obituary, which was nice because it gave a lot of his history, filling in gaps I didn't know. But made me very sad. I always had it on my to-do list to go see the band play, and the only reason I didn't in recent years was because not working, I don't have any expandable income at all. So I can't blow money on things like going out to a bar. But it was on my to-do list when I started working again and get some money flowing. Is there a lesson in there? I don't. It's just life, I don't think there's any real lesson there. But 2 years, he passed away 2 years ago, and I never heard of it. And so I always thought that he was still out there playing. Did my sister mention it to me? I kind of doubt it because I tend to remember the sadder things of life more, the morbid things. And I didn't. It was a shock to me. And I was still thinking in the back of my mind, when I start working again and I get some money, I'm going to go see him play. So it's a bit weird to find out. I don't know. So he moved back into the area, in his hometown area. Technically, he was living in the next town over, but that literally could have been a couple blocks away from my town, because my town was very small. So when he moved back into the area, it must have been strange coming back to your hometown area when the house that you grew up in is owned by somebody else now, but you're back into this area that you were in 40 years ago. That's really a strange experience, I would think. I hope I never end up in that situation where I'm going back to my old town to live. But yeah, that was quite a thing that really got me kind of stuck in my head for the last week or two. That this guy Doug had passed away. And he seemed like a nice guy. Just reading the obituary and reading about his life and things like that, it seemed like he was a very rooted guy, you know. So it was quite a shock. And they said that his band is going to continue on. But I never knew who else was in the band. I don't know if there's other people in the band from my town or not. I didn't really know. I didn't recognize any of the names when they mentioned the 3 or so other guys that were in his group. But yeah, I was really hit by the fact that he had passed away. So he had moved back into town, like I said, about 4 years ago, and passed away about 2 years later. So I don't know if maybe he was already sick or knew it when he moved back into the area, and in his mind he wanted to be back where he grew up. I'm not sure if that had anything to do with it, or it was just coincidental that he moved back into the area and then he got sick and passed away like 2 years later. I'm not sure. But it's one of those things that just got stuck in my head. And, you know, I was always hoping there was going to be an opportunity for me to go see his band play and tell him how I was this little kid on this bike and I heard his band play, and it was like just the most exciting thing I'd ever seen. Because that was when I think of being a kid, and exciting things. That's probably the only thing that ever happened to me that was like that I enjoyed, that was unexpected. Like I said, Christmas and birthdays come and you get excited for them, but you know they're coming. They're always anticipated events. And I don't have too many exciting things happen to me when I was a little kid, I can tell you that. So I hope the audio on this one's coming out okay. Didn't mean to go on for so incredibly long again, but it's a few minutes shorter than when I initially did this first video that the system didn't take. So there's my story of remembrance and reflection once again of my youth. One of these days I will get back to music. Maybe next time, you know, maybe I'll go back to do the vinyl pulls again. Right now it seems like it's never going to get cool. It's never going to be autumn here, but it could be a week away. Who knows? We had a couple cooler days, and it's not disgusting out, but it gets to the upper 70s or hitting around 80 at the high point, which to me is too uncomfortable. And, you know, it's muggy in the garage here once again, which just disgusts me. I have the air conditioner on in my main living space again, which is something that I really didn't want to this far into September, but that's the way it is. Sorry for going on this long. Hopefully maybe this video can put you to sleep. You can just put it on and get into bed or your easy chair, your recliner or something like that, and just veg out to it. So I don't know how this new microphone, how well it's picking up the background music or anything like that. This is a professional microphone, so it may, you know, it's designed to only pick up within a few inches of, you know, what's within a few inches of the actual mic itself. So I don't really know how much of the ambient sound of the speakers that are behind it, how much that's picking up. Probably almost none, but there is music there. And I'll work on that as well. And once again, sorry for going on for so long, and I will be back soon. Take care. Tune in next time for more
Tales from the Garage.